Hi there. So we're going to do a demo right now of wood engraving. We're going to work towards I would say, the more complex uh, engraving and block cutting styles to the simplest that we're going to be demonstrating here. And um, in that respect, let me start showing you the tools, some of the tools that we use in wood engraving. They're like jeweler's tools, really. It's a good way to describe them. But they've been refined over the years. So traditionally, wood engravers worked on boxwood, English boxwood. But now boxwood in England is a protected species. So it's but the good news is that um, you can engrave on the end grain, which is the tree ring side of this, if you can see that. On the side that has the grain, it creates a very smooth contoured cut like this. Turn the block, not your hand. Create an engraved groove. It can be more easily demonstrated on this, which is it's a resin grave block. This is a polymer that they've been working on for decades to emulate English boxwood. Um, I've put a layer of ink on it, India ink, as to provide a satisfying contrast, so that I can demonstrate how this works. This is how a resin grave comes to you. You can, I think, Above Ground Art Supply, risking an endorsement, in Toronto keeps this in supply so that you can order it from them. And they also have standard graving tools, so just the square gravers, and fairly narrow ones too, um, that can be acquired there if you feel so compelled. The power of wood engraving is the detail you can achieve at a very tiny level. I should You might remember from the video when you saw the picture of the young boys working on the wood engraving in that old wood engraving, um, how they were working on these pads. And this is what's called an engraver's pad. It's a sand filled with sand, leather filled with sand sewn around the edge. It makes it really easy to spin the block. And it also keeps the block somewhat elevated. So it keeps the blade away from your hands in case it skates, although if you're adept at it, you shouldn't have to worry about that too much. So you can tend to make short, curving cuts. The idea is not to do really long cuts. It's a very meticulous and very, I don't know, attention to detail type of thing. It's also very Zen-like when you get into it. So I've made one white line, and literally that's going to turn up as a white line on the printed version. So this is still a very black block. It hasn't been engraved very much. And I can go and emulate what I've done by putting a second line in. Taking a chance by doing a long continuous one, but I have some experience of this. So what I've done here is I've created these two white lines. The line in between is the black line. Everything is reverse, so There we go. Now I'm going to go and widen that white line using a different type of tool. There are many different types of tools. I won't get into all of the different variants right now, but there's spit stickers and scorpers and gravers and all sorts of arcane types of names for them. I'm not going to get into too much detail here because it's something you can fall into very easily when you're doing it, but to watch it might be a little tedious. So here's a small square tool that creates a wider cut, and it illuminates more of my line. So I'm going to clear out a large white area around it. It does a somewhat cleaner job of it too. You can see how it's fraying around the edge here. So this is good for clearing out wider areas of white. And you can go in. I'm not going to compose now, so there's looks like a beginning of a black line of some sort in there. So that's resin grave. And this one I was showing you before, this has an engraving on one side. Some kind of acrobat. And on this side you can see the maple. This is maple. Maple is a good wood for using for wood engraving. So are any of the fruit woods. One thing you really have to keep in mind is that when you do get a block of it, it has to be polished almost to a glass surface. This feels like glass that I'm rubbing right now. And that requires several grades of sandpaper, right from one that seems fairly fine, like a 600 or something like that, down to whatever the finest sandpaper you can get before it gets wet. The blocks can't get wet because that will sink into the fibers of the wood and cause them to expand when it dries. So it has to stay perfectly dry. So that's wood engraving. It's linoleum, and I already spoke to you about the background and the history of linoleum and its uses. These are cuts here. They've already been done. You can see sort of the working of them. People do very fine work. This is an incredibly fine lino cut done by a friend of mine. So the original lino was called Battleship because it was gray and it came off of battleships. I think the story I've heard, and I have no idea whether this is apocryphal or not, is that the artist would go down to the docks in San Francisco when they'd bring the fleet in, have it retrofitted. This is probably in the 1920s, and they would roll up all the aisleways inside the battleships with this linoleum and dump it on the docks, and it was garbage. So the artist would go down and cut off as much as they wanted and use it. Pretty much an infinite supply for them for their needs. Later, the linoleum, of course, even in that time was popular as a flooring, and it could come in many colors and many different patterns. You would probably normally see this color, this brown color, in art stores today. These are speedball cutting tools. Again, art stores tend to carry these, and they're relatively inexpensive. Take the tool in your hand securely. Always cut away from yourself, I guess is the best thing to say. This lino is old, it's very hard. That's good. That means you can go very detailed. Almost like, yeah. The thing I like about lino is you can really make expressive moves with the cutter. Sometimes it's good to get a couple of different nibs. They often come with some with them already, in different sizes and shapes. V-gouges, small V-gouges, U-gouges. This is a U-gouge right here for making large cuts. And the other nice thing about lino is that you tend, I mean, this one is better. The brown stuff is, you can actually see pencil marks on it for doing your drawing. You can see that's a heron, I think. And but the gray works as well for that as so the last one I'm going to demo for you is the easiest. And I should note that you can also get something called soft oleum at art stores, which would be a substitute for this. Or you can just get yourself a nice big eraser. This is just a white Staedtler eraser. It's fairly old now. You can use lino tools or you can use a knife, which I have to get. So with eraser cuts, we can work fairly easily. You can draw your, whatever, I'm going to do my initials. Something like that. So I've got knives here. This is a Olfa knife you can get at art stores. These are like more or less like box cutters. This is also Olfa, but you can get them at hardware stores or whatever. The nice thing about all these knives is that you can control the depth at which the knife point sticks out, which is a great safety feature. So I'm going to use one that, these are fairly common to find. So you cut an angle away from what it is you're going against, so that anything you're cutting out is like a little wedge shape. There we go. And the opposite over here. Just going to cut in a little ways and tail it out like that. And do the same thing, the opposite direction over here. And this is the way Dürer and all the masters of the Northern Renaissance and the great woodcutters of Europe, this is how the German, especially particularly the German cutters and East European cutters, did their engravings and woodcuts just with a knife, and just pop it out like that. I hope you can see what I'm doing there. So that's how to work with a knife. You can also use lino tools on these things, which are even easier. Don't want to do anything too complex in the demo, otherwise you'll be drifting off. That's good enough for now. Just going to carve that out. Great. So there, I've done my initials. Has anyone spotted the problem I've got yet? There's an issue with this particular block. That means it's not going to work out very well. Well, we'll find out in a minute. So that's the other thing you can get is stamp pad. Stamp pads are fairly easy to find, I think, still. Maybe these brown ones might be a little better. Yeah, there we go. You can see it quite clearly. So I can show you some interesting eraser cuts that have been done some time ago. These are done on, I believe it's it's a soft oleum, or that sort of, you can buy this stuff at art stores. It's quite similar to eraser material. It may even be eraser material, but it's in large flat sheets so that you can create stamps. And show that you can do some rather nice work, unlike my LT in reverse. So, good stamp, and here's another one. There we go. And so you can get quite a lot of detail in the cuts if you're using a fine gouge tool for a lino tool or something like that. So that's block printing. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.